We've all seen the headlines about what is happening in Israel and Palestine's Gaza. Tel Aviv is pounding the besieged Palestinian enclave after Hamas launched an unprecedented attack on the country's western flank. Caught in the crosshairs are Israeli and Palestinian civilians who are suffering massive casualties. So, what led to all of this? Hamas's attack comes nearly a year after the most right-wing government in Israel's history was formed. This government began losing popularity after it introduced controversial judicial reforms meant to weaken Supreme Court powers, sparking massive protests. On the Palestinian issue, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had already made no secret in 2019 of his strategy to divide the Palestinians.
Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy, to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank.
Hamas, one of Palestine's two major political parties, rules Gaza. The other party, Fatah, leads the Palestinian Authority and governs the occupied West Bank. Netanyahu also had some more interesting information.
We have neighbors who are our bitter enemies. I send them messages all the time. These days, right now, I mislead them, destabilize them, mock them, and then hit them over the head. It's impossible to reach an agreement with them. Everyone knows this, but we control the height of the flames.
So, you can see that all these latest developments did not occur in a vacuum. Well, mostly. Analysts have been pointing to a huge lapse in Israeli intelligence. How could planning such a massive coordinated attack through land, sea and air have gone undetected by the powerful Shin Bet, Mossad and Israel's military intelligence?
How could this party happen this close?
Violence has been raging in the occupied West Bank for over a year now, with increased Israeli military raids and a rise in settler assaults on Palestinian villages. In 2023, settlers violently attacked Palestinians at least 700 times, UN data shows. These settler assaults have triggered a rise in attacks from several local armed Palestinian groups, like the Lion's Den, which in turn increased the presence of the Israeli military. Israeli forces have been quite busy conducting operations in refugee camps in the occupied West Bank. Troops were below full capacity in the south of Israel, near Gaza, because some had been redeployed to the occupied West Bank, an Israeli source said, implying that there was a security vacuum in the region at that time. But Egypt is telling a slightly different story. An Egyptian intelligence official said Cairo had repeatedly warned Tel Aviv about something big, but that Israel had reportedly downplayed the threat, a statement which Netanyahu denied.
We have warned them an explosion of the situation is coming, and very soon, and it would be big, but they underestimated such warnings.
Recent media reports say Hamas orchestrated a careful campaign of deception to ensure Israel was caught off guard. The group says it was motivated by the Israeli government's recent actions, including provocative visits to Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem and increased pressure on Palestinian prisoners. A Reuters report details 2 years of subterfuge by Hamas that involved keeping its military plans under wraps and convincing Israel it did not want a fight. Meanwhile, the group's fighters were being trained and drilled, often in plain sight, according to a source close to Hamas. The same source said the group constructed a mock Israeli settlement in Gaza. That's where they practiced military landings and trained to storm it. Even so, a senior Hamas official has said that the Palestinian resistance group was surprised by the lack of resistance from Israel's side. Israel's response to Hamas's attack is a massive offensive on Gaza, with Netanyahu warning Gazans that what is to come will quote-unquote reverberate with them for generations. The situation in Gaza was already dire before Israel's latest onslaught. Gaza has been subject to an air, sea, and land blockade for the last 16 years. In other words, there are some pretty harsh restrictions on the movement of people and goods in and out of the territory. This has turned Gaza into an open-air prison, with over 2 million people crammed into territory smaller than the country of Liechtenstein. In the meantime, the US was quietly brokering talks between Saudi Arabia and Israel to normalize relations. That was part of its effort to expand the 2020 Abraham Accords, the Trump-era agreements normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab states. Riyadh reportedly wanted significant progress from Israel on resolving its conflict with the Palestinians, a hard sell for the state's right-wing government. Analysts say the ongoing fighting has dealt a blow towards any normalization talks, although those claims may be premature. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken told CNN that disrupting Saudi-Israel normalization efforts may have been part of the motivation behind the Hamas attack, alleging that Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran may have had something to gain from a failure of these normalization efforts. Hamas says Iran and Hezbollah played no role in the attacks, but that they might help if needed. And as details trickle in about the attack and its ramifications, Israelis have begun questioning how and why their government failed to protect them.